Hey there, it's your host Dan. We're up to part 15 of the C4 front end crash repair. I'm doing myself DIY, and today I'm going to be dry fitting the parts once again for a second time around, and fingers crossed it's going to go well. But the frame's been straightened, so I know that that's not going to be an issue, and that's what I ran into last time when I put the other fender well in and I found out that the front end was off a little bit. But what I'm going to do this time is start from scratch, try to get everything just as good as I can. I'm going to start with the hood hinge here. There's 3 bolts that hold it in, the 13 millimeter, one here in back, one here in the front, and there's one like in between, but it's on the inside of the frame rail. You've got to loosen all 3 of those, and there's 2 more that hold the hood hinge to the tie bar. There's also where the hinge comes up, there's a bracket on the other side of the swivel that goes to the hood. That has 2 13 millimeter nuts that hold the bracket to the hood. That will give you your left and right adjustment for the hood, and having all 5 of these loose will give you your front and rear adjustment of the hood. So I've got these loose on both sides. I'm going to close the hood, and I'm going to try and get those gaps as good as I possibly can in the rear and start tightening all this stuff down. I've loosened the 13 millimeter bolts for the latches on both sides and got them just snug, just barely finger tight. This should allow them to move around just a little bit, left or right, front or back, in case I'm pulling or tugging on the hood to get it in the proper alignment. I now got this gap set here between the door and the hood to exactly where I want it, and I'm going to mimic the gap from the back of the door to the quarter panel, which I didn't want to start using feeler gauges and scratch and paint, stuff like that. So I grabbed my latest issue of my guitar mag, and I found that the spine on the back of the door where the gap is it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. Nothing scientific here, but I mimicked it here from the gap from the door to the hood all the way up. It gets a little tight towards the top, but it's exactly the same way on the door, so the gap is going to look exactly the same, but it looks pretty good going straight down, and I'm pretty happy with the way this is gapped on this side, and I also did the other side too as well, just like this. So I've got the gap set. Now I can reach in through the headlight opening and tighten the bolts down. I'm not sure how you would do this if the headlights weren't removed from the car. I mean, I'm no expert on how this car was put together when they made it originally, but I would guess that this is probably what they would have done. And then don't forget to get our little guy that's on the inside of the frame rail. And I'll get him when I open the hood again. I pulled the crash bar down temporarily, and that's going to give me real easy access to the nut up here that holds the hood to the hood hinge. I can easily tighten it like this. I'm not sure how they would have done it at the factory, because once you shut the hood, you really can't get access to tighten these nuts. And then, you know, once I open and close it, it might shift around a little bit. So I'm going to do this and tighten up the front too, and then open up the hood, and then I should be able to get the back too without the hood hinges shifting around too much. Just doing a quick check of the hood height relative to the ground. Here to that edge there, I'm getting about 21.5 inches on the driver's side. Let's go over to the passenger side, take the same measurement. Here on the passenger side, I'm at 21.5 plus 1/16 of an inch. So it's really close from side to side. And I know body shops would never measure like this. I'm just a DIYer, just trying to do it the best I can. But this is telling me that the hood is pretty much level. I mean, it's only off side to side by 1/16 of an inch, which I can't notice. Before it was closer to 1/4 of an inch, and I could see it when I would look straight down the car. Now I can't see it at all, and everything looks pretty much flat and level. Got the hood back open, and I'm going to tighten down the latches on both sides. Get those snug down. Those should be right where they need to be. And I'll go do the same thing on the other side. The hinges are now tightened, and I got it where it pretty much just drops right down into place like it should. I had to do it twice because the first time it was off by just a touch and it didn't want to go down nicely. But this should, with minimal effort, there, it should click closed. I shouldn't have to really press down on it. And next thing I'm going to check is the bumper, the stop height in the back of the hood. So once it clicked like that, I'm going to pull up on the hood a little bit and see if I have any play. Is it making any noise. Is it rocking? No, this one's good. This is set fine on this side. On the passenger side with it latched, I'm going to do the same thing. And I can get a little bit of a rocking out of it, so I'm going to need to adjust the bumper here in the back. There's our little bumper guy. It's easier just to move this out of the way. Oh, this one's already loose. There's a 10mm nut down at the bottom that holds it tight. Let's see how many. Try to do this methodically here. I'm going to give it, I'm going to go 1 rotation. And we'll see what that does. As far as how it latches shut. I'll get that jam nut at the bottom tightened down. Make sure that's nice and tight. Okay, I'll go ahead and repeat the procedure. Let's close the hood up and see how well that latches. Okay. Alright, let's try that again. I had to adjust it twice. I got it up about 2 full turns. Go ahead and here and lower the hood down. Okay, I'll go ahead and push that down. I just want to see how much force it takes for it to make it click. And do I have any rock in the hood? No. Okay. So that the hinge should be adjusted, and so should our little backstop bumper here. That's good on this side. Next up, I'm going to install these guide pins that go in the very sides of the hood. Let's get those installed. Those guide pins are going to fit down into these slots right here, and these can be adjusted. You can move these in and out just a little bit. So I'm going to close up the hood and I'm going to see how well these are adjusted and if they need adjustment. Well, the hood closed just as easily as before when I didn't even have the pins in there. And it's lining up really nicely here down at the corner, so I'm going to leave it alone. The brackets that it goes into, it could be moved over to the left or to the right, probably to push in just the very edge of the hood a little bit or pull it out a little bit. But I'm happy with the way this looks along the edge as far as the evenness from the door to the hood itself on both sides. So I think I'm done with that part of it. Okay, so all the bolts are tightened for the hood now, everything at the front, the hinges, the back for the latches, the guide pins are in. The important thing is when I pull that hood release, it should pop up like butter. Let's try it. There we go. It lifted evenly on both sides. Pretty smooth. Pretty smooth. I'm just going to give it a little drop like I used to in the past. From probably about here. There we go. Shuts like it should. Okay, hood opens and closes no problem. I'm happy with the way that's aligned here. I'm happy with the door gaps. Now I'm going to move on to test fitting the bumper. I put the crash bar temporarily back up into place, and there's this little dot right here in the center of the hood, and I'm going to assume that's center, and it looks like it is dead center. And I'm going to line that in between the brackets here on the front of the crash bar. That way the left and right adjustment should be almost spot on. Now if I look at my gap relative to the bracket here from side to side on the driver's side and on the passenger side, I can tell it's a little bit shallower on the passenger side. And if I come in from behind with my hand like this, it won't even fit through. This side, my fingers can fit through. So the crash bar would have to come out just a little bit on this side. I already did some measurements, and it seems like the edge on the front bumper is in about a 1/2 inch. And if I wanted about an 1/8 inch gap on the nose, that would be about 5/8. So I've got about 5/8 already on the driver's side and only about a 1/2 inch here on the passenger side. I'm glad I saved some of those old shims off of the salvage bumper, because I'm going to use one of the thicker shims and I'm going to add it here over to the passenger side. I wound up swapping the thicker shim I added here on the passenger side for a thinner shim. I think it was sticking out just a little too far. What I'm trying to achieve is not this bracket here, but the very front of the crash bar. I'm trying to get it the same distance here from the edge of the hood. And you know, nothing scientific here. I'm just kind of using my finger as a guide to feel if it's bigger or smaller on either side. I want to have this even. And now that I use the smaller shim, it feels like it's even from side to side. Next up, I'm going to micro adjust these brackets here in front on top of the crash bar. Now I took these once off already to paint them because they were a little bit rusty. Put them back to about where I thought exactly they were. They could be just a little bit skewed, and I think they are. So I'm going to undo the bolts and I'm going to get these lined up. They're a little bit wider here towards the middle than they are towards the ends. And that 5/8 that I was hoping is going to be the magic measurement between here and the hood, that's where I'm going to set that to. And hopefully when I put the bumper cover back on, I'm going to get a real nice 1/8 inch gap all along the front of the hood. Here's how I'm aligning these things. Don't laugh. I'm sure body shops all across the country would approve. But anyways, I used a piece of 1/2 inch drywall, stuck it in there. That gives me my spacing as far as the 1/2 inch off the bumper. And then I used 2 shims down here, a thick one and a thin one. Give me about 3/16 of an inch. I double checked the doors. They're not 1/8 inch. They're 3/16 of an inch gap. So this will set my gap, and we'll get this bracket here completely straight along the edge of the hood. With that little down and dirty trick, I was able to set that gap perfectly even relative to the edge of the hood. And I'm setting it for 11/16 to start with, and I'm hoping that's going to be spot on. But if it's not and I want to increase it, at least I have a baseline and I know how much further I need to increase it by in order to get the proper gap I want between the hood and the front bumper. So now I'm going to proceed and slap that front bumper cover on, see where we're at. Well, my little drywall and shim trick seemed to work, because I've got the gap that looks like to be the gap I want, and it's even and it's consistent down both sides of the hood, which is good. So that's shaping up. Now the sides here, they are hanging just a little bit low, but there's a support bracket I have to put in both corners that props that up and sharpens up the lines at the very edges. And that's going to be my next step, is to get those installed and get those trued up. Well, a few more hours and I'm getting closer. I'll tell you, this bumper is not easy to align, at least not for me. A couple things I realized. One, I didn't have a exact reference here in the center. What I did was I took the bumper and I smushed it against the hood. Now there's like this soft curve in it, same thing in the bumper, so it'll kind of like interlock when you wiggle it together, and just make sure it's gapped evenly on the sides. The pieces of tape I had already in there, so I took a marker and just drew 3 lines. This way, when the gap is created, I can still see the lines and make sure that the front bumper is going to be aligned to the hood itself when all's said and done. I don't have to know the exact center of the hood or the bumper in which to do so. I'm just going to go off of these 3 lines, which will give me the exact same result. The wheel wells, I loosened up all the bolts holding them in, just a couple turns, because those interlock down here into the front bumper down at the bottom, and there's also a strip along where it meets on the tire. I'm going to put some temporary bolts in so that those are kind of secure, just so everything kind of goes together, because really we have 4 pieces kind of getting aligned at once. It's the front nose, which has a little bit of slop once it's on the impact bar. We have the impact bar, which can go side to side a little bit. The shims here on the left and right, I got to make sure that I have the exact shims, you know, the thickness for both sides, which I think I do. And also, you know, it hooks into the fender wells, which gives it a little bit of rigidity here at the side so it doesn't flop around a little bit. Also too, I realized that right now I only have 2 nuts holding it on the front nose to the tie bar where the studs go through for the crash bar. If you tighten those too much right off the bat, it starts ruining, you know, shrinking your gap. I only have them tight enough just enough to hold it up for right now. That's going to be my next step, to go down there and get the other two down below, which are a lot harder to get to, and get those tight and tighten up the top two, and you basically tighten down the impact bar and verify that my gap is still going to be, you know, what it is right now, where it looks all nice, even, and true. I'm really glad I'm taking the time to test fit all this. Everything is looking like it. I'm going to be able to get it perfectly aligned, you know, with a little finesse in here and there and whatnot. But I'm really glad I'm doing this right now, because if these were painted pieces, you know, all the wiggling around, and if there's any kind of adjustments, I'd rather do it right now than later, because I'm going to be the one who's going to have to put this together once this car or the parts come back from paint. And the idea is, for the bumper cover, all I want to do is take just the bumper cover off, nothing else. And this way, when it's back from paint, I can put the bumper cover right back on. The impact bar is already going to be, you know, locked down where it needs to be. The skids will all be tightened up. The wheel wells will all be tightened up. Everything should just kind of fit right into place. I mean, it's not that easy to get it on anyways, but I don't need it to take 10 times as long or start ruining or scratching parts that I just got back from a body shop that were freshly painted. So that's what I'm going to work on right now. I just got a little bit more finesse in. I want to make sure that everything lines up and is going to look all pretty, because if I can do it now, I can repeat it again, and it'll be a lot easier the second time around. Once I have everything in the know, I have all the adjustments made. Loosening up the fender wells was the right thing to do, because part of the bumper, the side of it, is going to really be supported underneath from the fender well itself. Now, I took some temporary screws and put those in place in a couple spots along the bottom and along the edge where the tire is. Now, this right here, as far as the nose, is in a little bit relative to the hood, and my gap right here is getting real tight right around this edge of the corner. Now, I have all the bolts just about 2 turns loose for the fender wells that hold it to the frame. So what I noticed here is, now down underneath, if I push up a little bit, my gap is now restored, and I'm pretty much where I need to be here. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to push up from underneath, and I'm going to reach into through the fender well, and then I'm going to tighten down some of those bolts, and this should hopefully have things rest right about here, which would look pretty darn good. There's one other adjustment that can help even out the very, very corner sides. If this gap here is a little too close or it's a little too far, there's a nut right here off of the bracket from the wheel well to the frame with a 10 millimeter here. This can be loosened, and you could put shims behind this to push the fender well back and kind of suck this corner of the bumper in. Or in my case, I loosened the 2 10 millimeter bolts that hold it to the frame, pulled that bracket just a little slightly forward, used no shims, and tightened it down, so this way it's sucking the fender well just slightly forward. That pushes on the very edge of the bumper, which pulls this gap just ever so slightly out. Okay, one of my last adjustments I'm going to make is the height of the bumper cover relative to the hood. I'm going to want to make sure that this bumper cover is sitting a 32nd of an inch proud of the hood. It looks best when you're standing back and you see the visual line. Now, I've already done the passenger side here, so I'm using this is a body shim, which is 32nd of an inch. If I place this directly on the hood, and I'm not worried about scratching it, because obviously we're going to repaint it, but if I put it on the hood here, I can see that I've got that 32nd of an inch. Over here, where it bolts into the frame with the crash bar, same thing. I've got that 32nd of an inch. Now the passenger side is done. I've already done that side. Driver's side here, if I put it over here by the nose, I've got that 32nd of an inch. Now this paint is probably pretty thick here, since this is, you know, the little second coat for the little stripe dealie that somebody put on. But if I go over here to about where it bolts in for the impact bar, I don't have that 32nd of an inch. I can see I've got a little bit of a rock, which means the bumper cover is sitting just a touch low. So as much as I don't want to do it, I'm going to have to go back and loosen the 2 nuts on the crash bar on the driver's side, and these ratcheting wrenches with the swivel at the end. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have these. There would be no way. I'm almost using this as like a crow's foot in there to get that nut, and I'm only getting about a 1/16 of a turn, maybe 2, maybe 3 clicks max to tighten and loosen the bottom bolt. So it's real tough to get the bottom one undone. Top one's not too bad, same thing, limited access. But I'm gonna loosen those nuts, and I'm gonna pull the crash bar up ever so slightly so I get my 32nd of an inch over here. Well, that sucked, but hey, I felt it had to be done, and just that little micro adjusting gave me that 32nd of an inch I need here, so I'm not rocking the shim here downward towards the nose. Now I've got all my gaps set to 5/32 of an inch average. It's plus or minus a 32nd of an inch, so at the very minimum it would be an 1/8 inch. At the max it would be 3/16 of an inch, but it averages about 5/32 of an inch. That's what this is right here. This is a thick and a thin shim. This is exactly 5/32 of an inch. Towards the middle, the gap might get a little bit bigger, and I think that's kind of normal on most Corvettes. Like right here, it widens out just a little bit, closer to the 3/16. Let's see if I put the shims in here. Well, we're still about 5/32. Right here, I'm a little loose. Okay, now towards the ends of the bumper, it might just get a little shallow. I can still get my 5/32 in here towards the ends, but it's nearing an 1/8 inch here towards the end. So I am completely satisfied with the gap I have across the bumper, between the bumper and the hood. It's the same exact gaps I had between the hood and the doors, and also from the doors to the rear quarters. And now I've got my 32nd of an inch just above where the bumper is, just above. And I also checked too on my daily driver, and it seems like GM's average gap is about 5/32 of an inch, plus or minus a 32nd. So at max you're at 3/16, and at the very minimum you're at an 1/8 inch. In between is that 5/32. Alright, well, I'm all done getting that bumper on. And embarrassingly, it took me about 2 full days to get this on. This is probably something that should be handled really by the pros. This was kind of tough to get on there. But I'm glad I did this all before sending this out and getting this done for paint, because now that crash bar running behind the front nose here, that's in place, bolted down. As far as the height adjustment is proper on both sides. The number of shims behind it is correct. There's 2 bars, one on each side, that the top of the bumper cover bolts into just under the inner edge of the hood. Those are set correctly. The wheel wells, I loosened those so they mate to the front bumper cover easily. Those have all been tightened down. So the idea is going to be, when I send this out for paint, I want to just be able to pull just the bumper cover and hopefully not have it be a huge hassle of getting it back on. And probably is going to be tough, but nothing like getting this on here, you know, like I'm starting from scratch. Let's take a look once again at gaps here in front. Like I said, they're about 5/32, plus or minus about a 32nd or a 64th. They do not exceed 3/16, and they do not go below an 1/8 of an inch. And on the edge here, they usually suck in a little bit. Usually I think a lot of Corvettes have a little less of a gap here, but that can also be attempted to be adjusted out at the back brace there at the wheel well, either pulling the edge of the bumper cover backwards or forwards to adjust this gap. But that was a lot of work to get this on there, and I kind of had the feeling it was going to go on there and go on straight and everything was going to line up, but I had to see it with my own eyes. I really did, because I definitely would not want to do this with the painted piece. My next step is going to be, I have to get a spoiler here for underneath the car, because mine broke into 3 pieces. I have to get the one that matches the ground effects that run along the side. I didn't want to do that until now, and just make sure I wasn't buying a part and it would be a wasted effort and be hard to return in case this didn't turn out right. So that's my next step, and hopefully in this video, if you're doing the same thing, trying to get your car all adjusted, your hood or your bumper on your Corvette, and get those properly aligned. Hopefully this should have all the steps and tips in there that you could get that accomplished. But once again, this might be something that may be better reserved for the body shop guys to get that on there for you, because it's a lot of work. It's very tedious, and it can be very frustrating at times, because this bumper cover, when it's on loose, it's very pliable, moves around a lot, but once you get it bolted down, that's when things become extremely rigid, and that they don't want to move around at all at that point. A lot of finessing to get this where it is, but now I'm confident that once I get this off, get this painted, it's going to go pretty much right back on into place. So I hope you enjoyed watching the video, and as always, thanks for watching.